Sahana Bhavatu Sahanau Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavaditam Astuma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. May that one protect us both. May that one nourish us both. May we work conjointly with great vigor and energy. May our study be fruitful. May we not unnecessarily cavil with each other. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. The modern child of today has grown up with an idea of the subtle and the gross. Most children today are computer literate and will even educate those people much older, not brought up in the computer age. When I was younger, we didn't have mobile phones, we didn't have computers. The only computer that I ever saw, even in my teens, would have been a big, big building with multiple tapes and having the capacity, perhaps, maybe of a cell phone or a mobile phone or something of that order. Computers today are able to control activities at a great distance, and we can learn a lesson from this. You can imagine the amazement from age to age when new developments take hold. For example, it wasn't so long ago, maybe 100 or so years ago, where electricity replaced gas lights. We can even go back not so far backwards from there to see how even gaslight was an invention and piped through pipes in street lights and so on. Today we are embarking on a whole revolution akin to the era of the early motor car. Now today we take motor cars for granted, but today there are motor cars that will work by themselves. They will drive by themselves. No requirement for any person in control. This is in development, but it's not far off where most cars may well be like this. But how does it work? What are the subtle forces behind it? So while every child may be able to operate computers and handle computer technology, or they may be able to turn on a television set, they will not know the subtle forces that sit behind it, but still accept that vaguely something is there, that without knowing the intricate mechanism inside it, they can still operate it. And they vaguely understand behind colors, sounds, and all the movements presented on the screen that something is unattached to them all, and their subtle waves are there, surpassing powers which confer their very gifts when the tuning is correct. In spiritual life, it is exactly the same thing. It is to access the subtle forces that sit behind what we normally experience through the sense organs, and see how we can dive beneath the surface and catch something special. Subtle waves are there, and then as a child develops, again they see that if you build up muscles, they take it for granted that the external machinery that is being used has the capacity to build up muscles, but there's still an awareness of some internal shift and movement that is responsible. The muscular fibers are there that respond to the weight. Something internal is happening. No doubt stimulated from the outside, but the real activity is from the inside. When a flower grows, we think of it as an external activity responding to the environment of sunshine and nutrients and water and air. Particularly now in spring, we see, there's a reason, I suppose, why we call it spring, that flowers suddenly spring up almost from nowhere. Buds on trees that weren't there yesterday are now there today. And before we know it, every branch is flowering. It is wrong to attribute this to the outside, because all of this activity comes from some internal entity. And if we trace this internal entity sufficiently inward, we will see that it is a result of a divine will that is operating. That subtle forces are coming from it. And when we look at these subtle forces, we can easily understand a concept of a play, a drama of waves operating within a playground. And as a child develops and learns to gain muscular strength, there's an intellectual strength also. And in marking out a career path, it may well be that some children may be divided into an interest in logic and sciences and that kind of thing, physics and so on, chemistry, all those sciences. Others may be more interested in art, drama, that kind of thing. And when we break it down further, we see every individual has got some unique creative capacity to do something different, to play their role in the drama in a different and unique way. So the subtlest forces are our inborn tendencies. And all the development must proceed by taking into account these natural inclinations. Ignoring or even distorting these particular characteristics will not augur well for a harmony and balance. But behind these predispositions, there's the superior, creative, and harmonizing will of the divine from which it is emanating. So on the one hand, we have this inborn set of playful characteristics that we should use and we should exploit to the fullest extent. Our full intellectual and artistic development should be unfolded, but it's all from within. And the more within we go, the more subtle we go, until we come to a point where we see this is a divine will, a divine consciousness that is spreading everywhere. And that being tuned into it will create for us the highest level of harmony. And to prolong the talents, or to prolong the game, I should say, that entity endows us with certain talents and places us in the field. And this field is like any other sports field. Nice opposition players are provided for us. We shouldn't expect a smooth game. There are some people who play a very rough game called rugby. What use is the sport if there are no opposition players? If there's no rough and tumble? If there's no goal? If there's no plan? If it's an empty field and somebody says, I think I can play this game, give me the ball, and no other team players and no other opposition players, just a field. Well, what kind of game is that? And so we can look on this universe as God's toy or playground. And to prolong this game, we can use the inborn talents and we can use that places us in the field of endeavor, complete with all the so-called difficulties, obstacles, and necessary learned skills that we can develop as we go on. So we have to learn to ask then, taking this attitude, not why, but why not, what next? And put something in positive. Bearing in mind that our thanks and our valuation and our recognition should go to not ourselves, but the inner controller that is developing from within, providing from within, and ruling also from within. So therefore, we can proceed in life in a good-humored way, filling the non-competitive gap as we go, and attribute everything to the Lord and His perfection and His glory. That would be a better way of proceeding throughout life. And that ensures that His glory will be quietly manifested through and all around us, creating harmony wherever we go. It will flow with its own irremovable stamp of reality. The emerging certainty acts like a kind of light lamp and doesn't leave any room for fear or doubt, no trepidation. That means we can dive into the life with a fullness of faith and a fullness of good-humored joy. And that mindset will not be confined to a small area, say of the brain, but find its effect so that every cell of the body will tingle with it and will shine beyond the magnetic field of the body everywhere, because the source of that is only one thing: a unified entity. The whole of the religious endeavor is to find out what is that unity, away from the diversity. And as long as we are involved in the diversity, we can never really fully understand and appreciate the unity. And yet there's a drive toward unity inherent within us. And the inner controller is there. Relying on that, we don't have to worry about growth or exploitation fully of talents. We simply know that the inner controller is there within us. In the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, there are a series of interesting questions asked to the great sage Yajnavalkya. First of all, he is asked a question because the Upanishads will lead us progressively, bit by bit, step by step, to these more subtle areas until we come to a unity of existence. And with each more subtle area, we come to a greater unity, a more expansiveness, a more unified position. A unified field theory is something that we can adopt, seeing the various variations in the fields of people and places and events in different forms. We can merge all of these into one entity and then continuously practice tuning our attention into that single entity. And two effects of this are possible. Firstly, and it requires a touch of poetic imagination, we can compare all phenomena, including the seeming rotation of three states of consciousness: waking and dreamless sleep, and revalue them and seeing them as different ornaments made from gold. And before their creation and after their periodic transformation and final melting, what is left is gold, because you cannot have gold and a ring, or gold and an amulet, or gold and a bracelet. Gold is gold and can be mutated into so many different forms. But when it's all melted down into a unity, it is pure gold nonetheless. Supposing we're able to do that and stand in that poised position of substance, a formless lump where only gold is there, a precious metal. Now, the analogy is very apt, because when we strip all these various differentiations of name and form, we find pure gold, something that is precious, and something that shines, something that never deteriorates. The analogy of gold is so apt because gold cannot tarnish. Gold is precious, not only because it is nice to look at, but it is also everlasting, and it has the heaviest density, so it can easily be extracted by gravitational methods. So the analogy is even a subject for meditation. What is that precious thing, that golden entity that sits within and shines? But one more thing added, it acts as an inner regulator, an inner ruler, an inner controller. And so when we go back to that passage in the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, where people want to understand what is that unity of existence, not only the unity of existence, but the thing that links everything together. Let us take, for example, the human body. There's something that is called life. It is very subtle. We don't normally attend to it, but yet it is there. And when we contrast the life with something called death, then we realize it's a temporary thing. But something will knit these various parts called the body, all these constituent elements together. What is that? This question was asked, leading to more subtle inquiry. And so in this Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, this question is asked. And it is asked by, and I'm quoting here, by the way, from the third section of the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, in 7. And it begins off really with this question. So the question starts, Yajnavalkya is the post object of the question. In Madra, we lived in a house. I'll paraphrase the whole thing for you. They lived in a house where there was a where there was a ghost. And the owner's wife was possessed with this ghost. He was possessed really by a Gandharva, really. That is a celestial being, not exactly a ghost, but a music-playing entity. And we asked him who he was. We inquired, who are you? He said, Gobanda, son of Atharvan. And then he said, I've studied the scriptures and the sacrifices. Do you know? Is a question that is assumed everybody should know. What is that thread? What is that sutra by which this life and the next life and all the beings, in other words, what is that continuity of existence? What is that held together by? What is that thread that is woven, as it were, so that we say this lives and that lives? There must be some common thing that we call life. Here in Dublin, in the early part of the 20th century, 1930s, 1938, I think, more specifically, the great scientist, physicist Schrödinger, he had a series of lectures which was compiled into a book, What is Life? There's an interesting and eternal question. What is life? There's exactly this question being asked. And so what is the answer? The answer is seen to be known. See, the sutra, that is the inmost entity of the world, of that divine will from which everything comes, otherwise called this world. And it has to be described, and that's why the section is there. And this thread should be approached through personal instruction, says the commentator. So the answer is very simple. And he uses one word that has been very misinterpreted. He uses the word vayu. It's a technical term. Some people interpret it as wind. In the Jewish tradition, in the Torah, we hear of the ruach, that is the spirit that breathes, as it were, across the waters. What a beautiful concept. Waters, a potentiality, a potential symbol for life itself, but lifeless until that spirit breathes, as it were, and activates it and gives it life. What is that? So that is called vayu, because like air, we find it consistently present everywhere. There's not more air here and more air there. We may find a movement of air as wind and so on in different places. And more recently, we have found something that is very consistent. Only a variation of one part in 100,000, and this is called cosmic microwave background. What some people interpret as the echo of a Big Bang. If you want to use that image also, then you can see that that is also an analogy. That before this world exists, you can imagine something there, and then it manifests all of a sudden. But it cannot be different from the world. What was manifested is the same thing, just like gold in a ring is the same thing as gold itself. So this thread is there, this sutra is there that connects everything. And we can call it in many varied ways and terms just depending on your particular outlook and your particular interpretation. But whatever it is the same consistently everywhere, just as the cosmic microwave background is found to be consistent in all directions everywhere, with only small fluctuations and variations of 1 part in 100,000. Remarkably consistent. So the question is answered from an experiential point of view and a scientific point of view. We experience this sameness and oneness everywhere. And everybody seems to know that there is life. Today, we think of things differently, erroneously. Not so long ago, we thought of the whole of moving existence, winking stars, and space, and even the atom, everything, in fact, that has motion, to be intrinsically a part of life, not a dull material insentient thing, but completely activated and sentient. And what then moves that? So that is the next question. Therefore, O Gautama, when a man dies, they say that his limbs have been loosened, for they are held together, O Gautama, by the sutra or vayu. And quite so, Yajnavalkya, yes, I agree. But now describe, something that is called the internal ruler or the internal controller. There must be something even within that. What is that? And then the answer comes. And it is a repetitive answer so that we get the whole meaning of this. So the answer comes out in a repeated way with a repeated formula. Translated, he who habits the earth, who he lives with in the earth, who is there established within it. So it goes like this. Ya pridiviyam tishtan pridivya antaha, from within. Yam pradivi va avida yasya pradivi shariram. He who dwells in the earth, yet is within the earth, who the earth doesn't know. You ask the earth, who is within you? How did you come to be? It doesn't know. From that point of view, it is insentient. But from the point of view of the axis being tilted and the rotation, it's as if God entered into it, tilted it, and spun it. Now we have life. What are the chances of such an arrangement, even in our solar system, even in our galaxy? Very few. What we call the Goldilocks conditions arrive so that we can have this life. So he puts it in that way. The earth doesn't know whose body the earth is. We can consider this earth as a kind of body with an internal occupant that is called internal ruler. Whose body the earth is, who controls the earth from within. He is yourself, the inner controller, the immortal. Don't think that it is separate from you. That which is inside the earth is also in you, controlling you. There's only one controller. And to emphasize this point, the repeated formula is done like that. Let's take, for example, the earth. From our point of view, the earth has something useful, a useful component that we call soil. It doesn't matter what you put into it. Even if you put in a decaying material, some manure, the rose flower and the jasmine flower, although they are different and have different characteristics, will both grow proficiently and profusely in this material that is not very pleasant when we receive it with the nose. But from the plant's point of view, it is the best thing because it is using all the internal components and it knows what to select and what to bring up. Through capillary action, water comes up through the stem, and the stem being designed, and then that's distributed. And the flower also, when it comes, knows how to face the sun. It doesn't face away from it. And if you put it in the shade, it stretches its neck and stares round until the sun is caught. What a wonderful thing. Only because there's an inner controller. From the outside, it looks like a mystery. How does it happen? But those who know, understand, know. Some inner entity is there, some inner controller is there. And at its very, very base, it is called the divine will. Then it goes on again in the repeated formula. See, it comes now to he who lives in the sky, yet is within the sky, whom the sky does not know, whose body the sky is, who controls the sky from within. He is yourself, the inner controller, the immortal. So the Upanishads have this habit that if something is important and has to be stressed, it is continuously repeated and with sufficient examples so that you get the point. It is in this, it is in that. The principle that we call cowness. Supposing somebody tells me, and I don't know any different, there's a cow and it's brown. Well, the brown cow is seen. But then in order to get the idea of cowness, I look again and I see another thing, also with horns and the same structure, same four legs, but this time it is black and white. Then I understand. Cows can be brown and they can be black and white, and the more variations I see, the more of the cowness, the generalization I can see. And so this is the technique that is used here in the Upanishads. So he who dwells in water, yet is within the water, whom the water doesn't know, whose body the water is, who controls the water from within. He is yourself, the inner controller, the immortal. This is an opportunity for meditation because we can take each one of these items. And then when we see the subtle forces that lie below there, we come to one unified conclusion. Ah, you are there. The inner controller, the Antara Karna, that inner controller is there. And that is your own immortal self, imagine. Everything brings back to this one unity of existence. He who dwells in the sky, who is within the sky, whom the sky doesn't know. Then does the sky have a body? Yes. The body is the sky, that internal controller, makes a body, and that is called sky, makes a body, and that is called water, makes a body, and that is called earth. And then it goes on. So fire is there, sky is there, air is there, heaven is there, sun is there. He who is within the sun. See, it is not the sun whom all men see, but that whom we know with the mind, says the Atharva Veda. It is the light of lights, says the Rig Veda, whose body is seen by all, whose soul by none. That was the true light of the world, says Plato. And then we have, and in Deuteronomy we find it, in all the scriptures we find it. In the Christian John's Gospel, we also find reference to it, the light of the world, that spoken of as an effulgent person in the solar regions, which is free from evil. And because we cannot see it, we cannot identify it objectively, we have to trace it back through all these various examples. And he who dwells in the ether, that example is given, the final thing. So we have gone through all these subtle forces. What we see here, when examined properly, is comprised of combinations and recombinations of subtle forces that lie below them. And directed as a kind of playground for the cosmic will. What a beautiful series of possible meditations are given in this Upanishad. So we have to then make a reevaluation of things. And then what effect will that have on our daily life, on our daily living, seeing things in a slightly different way? Will we take life as seriously? No, we won't. That is the practical use of these various principles that are espoused in the Vedanta. Then, secondly, not only all of existence can be registered with a capacity to imagine these things as pure gold, we can also look at other phenomena which have a beginning and an end and see that that substance is the same throughout. But we can shift our imagination in a second way. We can imagine the beneficial outcome of correct tuning in a different way. Supposing we have a love of this invisible entity that we call God. Supposing we make that God our own. Supposing we understand the personal manifestation of this cosmic will that suits our temperament and suits our psychology. Supposing we can imagine the beneficial outcome of correct tuning and transform ourselves from a passionate player to a delighted spectator, even from that point of view, we can do it. And there you will find the unity once more. Once we're there, then we can enjoy the game. If we assume that this is the Lord's playground and the Lord Himself is playing, then we can stand there in a poised position as a delighted spectator, as a witness. And a witness is an enjoyer. We can enjoy what goes on in the field of our observation. And we can let go then of our egoistic grip on things, our egoistic aspect where we identify with this body and mind, and the body and mind are fields within which there is an inner controller, because the passage goes on within the body, within the mind. That is your own immortal self, only one immortal self, comprised of all these combinations of subtle waves. And if we can let go of this egoistic aspect, with all its associations of fears and hopes and doubts, temptations, and make them behave like a kind of spiritual weathercock that turns and twists in the wind, and we are not involved in it, nor are we identified with it. And yet it gives us information of the direction of the wind. Then what will remain will just be the playful movements, if we put ourselves in that witnessing position. We can then watch everything from the gallery the gallery of the saints and sages who stood there and experienced the same thing and described the same thing. And that, of course, is as far as words can go. Words and concepts have their limit and their borders, and we can only take it so far at the human level. And so the power of attention, which was moved in waves itself, now abides as the ocean itself. And it stands identified with a steady witness. And every wave which may come and which may go will only confirm this matchless glory of that entity that is standing there. Now there's a difference between a saint and a robber, for example. They see the physical aspects of the world in the same way. That is, tables and chairs and things, possessions. But what will the saint see? It'll only see that inner controller. What will the robber see? It'll see the effect of all the waves and engage the egoistic tendency. And then that will bring its effects. That robber will be caught up in an area of imprisonment, if you like, captivity. And the analogy is used because when a robber is caught, he goes to jail. And a robber wants to rob because it feels there's an absence of something. I haven't got something, let me go and rob it. But both of them will see the same thing. But the saint, on the other hand, easily makes his attention penetrate the physical, penetrate the mental, penetrate all these fields of himself and of others also, and then abides comfortably in that pure, undivided consciousness that covers everything, regarding it as his greatest wealth. He doesn't have to go and rob anything. So it's also his happy home. So many songs tell us, oh my mind, why do you linger in this foreign land? Why don't you go home? So from here he sees that unified consciousness is in fact the inner controller of all the physical fields, of all the mental fields, not just here, but everywhere. This can't really be expanded or cannot be diminished by the addition or elimination of parts because it's partless. There's a wonderful description in Swami Vivekananda's Jnana Yoga. In that section, it's called The Real and Apparent Man. So a question is asked, so what is left attached to the man who has reached the self and seen the truth in that the truth is the remnant of the good impressions of past life, the good momentum? Well, even he lives in the body, sees the same thing as the robber, and works incessantly, but he works only to do good. How do we recognize the person established in this partless consciousness? We see that the person is good, is full of purity of intention and action also, is good. Not only be good, do good, but full of goodness everywhere. And we see that is the characteristics, that is the evidence of a transformed life. His lips speak only benediction to all, nothing selfless or jealous about it, or selfish or jealous about it. His hands do only good works. His mind can only think good thoughts. His presence is a blessing wherever he goes. And he is himself a living blessing. Such a person, such a man will, by his very presence, change even the most wicked people into saints. Even if he does not speak, his very presence will be a blessing to mankind. So many saints and sages, holy people, liberated people, as it were, they don't have to say anything. Many of the ancient rishis were also called monis, silent ones. Nothing to say, but yet a presence. The great example of Swami Brahmananda, where there was a reported disturbance and difficulty in one of the monasteries, and members were about to be expelled. He said, no, don't do it. Let me come there. He didn't even mention the trouble or the difficult situation. He didn't sit down and discuss it. He only said, only one thing that you should do, and that is when I meditate, sit with me and meditate. Meditate with me. In Swami Prabhavananda's beautiful book, Sermon on the Mount, according to the Vedanta, he mentions this incident in relation to that great saying from the Sermon on the Mount, that one of the great beatitudes, blessed are the peacemakers. And you can see just by a person's presence, no words being passed, emanating peace everywhere. So can such men do any evil? Swami Vivekananda continues. Can they do wicked deeds? There is, you must remember, all the difference of pole to pole between realization and mere talking. See, any fool can talk, even this one. Even parents talk. Talking is one thing, realizing is another. Philosophies and doctrines and arguments and books and theories and churches and sects and all these things are good in their own way. But when that realization comes, these things drop away. For instance, maps are good, but when you see the country itself and look again at the maps, what a great difference you find. So those that have realized truth, they don't require the ratiocinations of logic and all the other gymnastics of the intellect to make them understand the truth. It is to them the life of their lives concretized, made more than tangible. It is, as the sages of all the Vedanta say, even as a fruit in your hand. You can stand up and say, it is here. So those that have realized the truth will stand up and say, here is the self. And you may argue with them by the ear, but they will smile at you. They will regard it all as child's prattle. They will let the child prattle on. They have realized the truth and are full. We recall, of course, Swami, I should say, Sri Ramakrishna's great parable, wonderful story, whose principle is, it is much more useful not to count how many leaves there are or trees there are, mango trees and so on, and study that and get all the botanical information that you like. It's much more useful to eat the mangoes. So the presence of this fullness, this inner controller is here, it's now. We can dive into it and fully enjoy it. We can shift our position at will and tune our attention in and enjoy what is there. So everyone must sooner or later make a permanent shift like this to this refreshingly sublime point of view. Sooner or later it will have to happen. And when it happens, then it's to sustain it habitually. It will be felt initially, of course, as a difficult task, a difficult uphill endeavor, a kind of a struggle, according to the strength of the attachment to this world as it is, or as we interpret it, or as we accept it. But it's a mistaken idea. And the more we are attached to it, the more struggle there will be to get away from it. It is only when the perceived multiplicity is accepted as the sole reality that negative values persist. But when we see a unity, then the harmony alone persists. So then alone, when all that multiplicity is understood, there alone comes jealousy. There alone comes rivalry, pity, egoism. They all dominate the mind and create havoc. And then on a national level, international level, wars, destruction, and the fallout of it. Weeping children, widows, orphans, refugees, all the things that we can find daily in the news if we have an inclination to listen to it. But they all disappear by seeing the Lord in all. And the Upanishads are very keen on this. Bhagavad Gita is keen on this. See the self in all beings and all beings in the self. Equally everywhere, not just in here or there, with an equal attitude. Then the question doesn't arise. Should we really see God in the robber? Yes, because underneath there is only one thing. Pure gold is there. We just have to tune in and catch it. There will be emotional obstacles also encountered while guiding your attention in this direction, from the lower to the higher values. They can be gradually overcome by sustained disciplines, all laid out carefully in Shastra, a kind of manual directing our behavior so that we can elevate the mind to increasingly higher values. And every scripture contains these things. The seeker must take delight in continually hearing about the glories of the indwelling Lord. and reflecting upon them. And whenever possible, must live in the company of virtuous people. You see, whatever we look at will be the start of a thread that leads us towards something. Don't forget Yajnavalkya's first question asked to him, what is that thread? Now the thread can lead you to something much more profound. Let us take, for example, the observation of a spider. A spider develops a thread from itself and drops it down. We would think that it will double it up and create a whole series of threads. No. It then withdraws it back into itself. And we can observe this as an analogy, as a metaphor, if you like, for what happens everywhere. How does this world come to exist? We can view it something like the spider, where a thread is emanated from it. A thread, a vayu. That is the thread that is projected and withdrawn. We can take another example, another analogy, if you like, breathing. When we observe the breathing, we take for granted that a whole series of events are necessary. First of all, air must be available to us. And we are not the ones who inflate and deflate the lungs, personally speaking. The inner controller is doing it for us, moving the diaphragm muscle up and down, and we don't even notice it. We're completely unconscious of it. When we are conscious of it and ask the question, who or what is directing this movement that we call breathing and keeping this living thing going? Then we come to this conclusion. It is this inner controller who has woven a body around itself and made that body its own, who is within it. But the body doesn't know about it. And when we identify with the body, we also don't know it. That is your immortal self. That is the immortal self in this body. And that is the immortal self declared one without a second everywhere. So sincerity itself will create opportunities for a person who understands such a thing and sits in this position. And such contact will imperceptibly remove many obstacles and points of resistance from his mind if he sees things in this way, traces things back to an original input, an original internal controller which is there, remotely operating things by its mere presence. Another example would be the ocean, how the ocean's waves, how the tides come in and tides go out, things are projected, things are sustained and things are withdrawn. This drama is seen all the time. Or for the sake of convenience, we might replace this term of inner control with the term God, or we might even replace this term of God with the expression, the spiritual universe. Very often people tell us we are naturalists. We don't believe. We only believe nature, and nature controls everything. But this is saying there's no such thing as natural. It is all supernatural. It is all only the one entity, looking like different forms, looking like different names. And we, being mistaken, identify it as a multiplicity of things to be controlled by us, not understanding the presence of this inner controller that is also expressive. And so it's a bit, as it were, of this spiritual universe is projected into our sense-bound sphere. This bit can be seen in its true light only if we arrive at the idea of a totality, beyond time, beyond space, beyond causation, and beyond multiplicity. We have to train our attention to stay playfully attuned to it. If we value it as a play, our attitude should be one of playfulness. The unchangeable, that is the immutable, has no characteristics cognizable by our instruments of perception, but yet it can be spoken of as eternal and multiformed. And just as the child operating a light switch or a computer does not know the unseen forces behind it, yet knows it works. And the way it works infers the subtle aspect of it behind, sitting behind. So we can begin, of course, to study all of this from the very earth that is mentioned in the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad and all its material bodies that have their births, their growth, and their final dissolution. And from here we can proceed by resorting to all these various figures of speech, understanding that these invisible waves the senses can't catch, and the author of them and the projector of them also cannot be understood and caught. So something like a divine spider, we can use these words, or something like the breath, this ruach in the Jewish terms, or something like the tides of the ocean that come in and come out. And therefore, all these examples and analogies can only hint at this one unified consciousness. But is it forever out of our range? No, says the Vedanta. It is really within your range because it is the only thing which is there. Don't forget, it is your own immortal self. So we should develop a sense as an initial step for recognition, a sense of, first of all, recognition of its presence, then a sense of adoration and thankfulness should be developed. A re-registration of all these activities to this one entity, this one unity of existence. The limiting human frontier should be recognized, its imperceptibility transcended then. And then what happened afterwards is beyond our description. We then enter into an area, as it were, of sublime experience. All our concepts are within a small framework that has its own limitations and are all within the field of multiplicity. But one thing, however, is sure: inexhaustible spiritual wealth will express itself in its own unpredictable ways. Anyone can lead their attention from any aspect of the glory to this blissful base. Again, we can see how this blissful base finds examples, if we like, let's say, in the cosmological model of the Big Bang. It can be useful to see that there has to be a starting point somewhere, and there has to be a projection. We can gradually visualize the sun taking shape from this, and we can mentally place the earth within its tilted axis and see how the arrangement is within a gravitational field. And all the pervading intelligence has woven these bodies around itself, entered into it, woven the body, not even entered into it, but standing there in a primordial condition before the earth was there, weaving a body around itself. And by its very presence, making what we call life on the earth and coordinating all the subtle forces and elements together. And as each begins to condense itself, it brings out its distinctive qualities. We can find a suitable formula to direct the attention from a few of these qualities back to the origin, and do that repeatedly. Taking the earth, for example, in this is what Yajnavalkya said first, the earth, and then went on to these multiple examples. And we can do the same in turn. We can take any thread which we find, anything in front of us, and then find out its true origin and see it comes to one thing. The analogy is pure gold. In the case of the sun and the moon, the starting point can be their power to shine, for example. Attention can be directed to the fact of the sun being self-luminous. Or we have to take it as a pleasant game to move our attention from any of these celestial bodies to their preforms, what was there before these things existed. And then the body itself, to the breath, the movement of the diaphragm, and to speech, the capacity to speak, even the capacity for all of the sense organs to operate, the capacity for the mind to think and register it back to a supreme thinker, to a supreme enjoyer, to a knower. The knower cannot be known, the thinker cannot be thought of, and the seer can never be seen. Trees, birds, animals, human beings, they have the capacity to reproduce themselves through their seeds. And so from these we can reverentially, I should say, guide the attention from any seed, any bija, and bring it back to its origin. Let's take, for example, the Sri Yantra, where there is a bindu, a point inside. We can also say, maybe that's kind of like a seed from which everything can come. That is a wonderful, wonderful image to tell us how we can move from the inside to the outside, from the outside back to the inside. So that knower is he, that thinker is he, is the inner controller. He is our own self, our own immortal and perfect self. And anything presented by the physical and mental fields must be welcomed, not opposed, not to think it is against us, but welcomed as a kind of opportunity for us to access and remain tuned to the harmony and bliss that is this inner controller. The whole of life should be a kind of meditation like this. And once we do that, we will have the same characteristics that I mentioned here by Swami Vivekananda in this real and apparent man that is mentioned in his series of lectures under the title of Jnana Yoga. So with these words regarding the inner controller, I would hope that you can use this in a meditative way and access this from within by contemplating it and registering it correctly and understanding its presence, and then feeling, integrating with its unity and beaming from there. And that has a transformative effect, not only on the meditator, but also on all those associated with that entity. And when we see that there is a link everywhere, it means the whole world and the whole of existence is transformed by a single entity who registers themselves as the supreme thinker behind all thought. So may peace, peace, peace be unto all. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Thank you.